Hey y'all, my name is Luke. I make bags from high performance materials that would otherwise be discarded. Today I'm back in the shop and I wanted to show you how I make a simple drop liner backpack. So this is the slightly more streamlined, pared down feature-wise version of the main drop liner backpack. And this is the medium size. So I just wanted to show y'all how I make these, starting with getting all the exterior pieces cut out, the webbing cut out, and the liner materials cut out, and then go on over to the sewing machines and get started. All right, so I've got all my pieces cut out here for a medium size simple drop liner. These are all the liner pieces here, this neon green stuff. This is our drop pocket. This is our interior zippered pocket and side panels, and then front and back. And then over here, I've got the side panels with the ultra stretch pocket and this piece of fabric that's the same size as the straps here. And then we've got our front panel with our grab handle / main buckle closure strap, and our number 5 standard zipper with the pull logo, and then the backing for it. And then for the back panel, we've got the back panel grab handle foam, and then the 2 diamonds that are like the 2 bottom attachment anchor points with the pieces of webbing for those, and then the bottom panel itself. And then for the top of the liner, this is our cinch. So it's just a long rectangular piece of this sill-coated nylon ripstop. And then we've got our pull cord with the pop lock. And then last but not least is the lid with a lid liner, zipper, which is the Eurotech water resistant stuff, and then our Fidlock 3/4 inch buckle, and zipper pull and zipper end. So that's it for the simple drop liner backpack pieces. I'm going to get them into these bins, and then we'll start sewing stuff together. All right, so first things first, on this front panel pocket, I will get the zipper ends sewn on. And as always, I just try not to reverse over zippers because my sewing machine tech told me it's bad for it. And you can throw your machine at a time or break a needle or whatever, so this way I can make sure that I'm not being a irresponsible sewing machine dude. All right, so this goes on like so. I center it, and these pieces that I'm using on the ends are a way to not have the zipper coil itself go into the seams, so it reduces bulk at the seams. And you know, this is a long zipper pocket, it doesn't need to go the entire way. And when I get it close to the top here, I'll go ahead and fold it back a little bit to give it a little bit of a zipper garage like that. And then back tack at the top. All right, we've got that attached, and now I have my marks on here, which are going to be really hard to see through the camera, but it's just a way of centering where this strap goes. And I have a mark at the bottom here to make sure it goes on straight. So I'm going to tack it on with the needle feed machine first, and I'll take it over the bar tacker. But since we're set up with the camera here right now, might as well sew on the label, which goes, in this case, just a little bit to the right and down from that strap. And I would normally put this more in the corner, but on these simple drop liners, this pocket is 3-dimensional on the front here, so it folds over on the edges, so this will end up being a little closer to the edge. And this material I'm using right now is an Ultra 200 that I have a little bit of, so just making one of these for a buddy and figured I should get video of the process. So now I'm gonna hop over to the bar tacker and just put a bar tack here, and then add a little bit of grab handle, you know, enough for a gloved hand to grab this, and then another bar tack at the top here, and then we'll come back to this machine. All right, the bar tacker. And this fabric is sturdy enough that I don't need to put any reinforcement behind it. But if I do thinner stuff, I will put a patch of reinforcement behind there. So there we go, enough for like a small carabiner or bike light loop kind of thing. And then I line up where my top center mark is here. that webbing, give it a little bit of slack, and then I find my other mark, which is right there, keep everything centered. All right, good to go. All right, now I've got the back panel for this pocket and then what we just made, and then I'm gonna line up my center mark on the exterior to the center mark on the interior here and just get started on it. And then when I get close to the edge, this is where I do that fold to add this three-dimensionality to this pocket. And my goal here is to make this tuck or gusset or whatever with enough room for seam allowance, but just barely. And that kind of makes it look nice and hidden. I'm just going to follow down the side. And when I get to the bottom corner here, I'm going to line up my center mark, which is going to be really hard to see on the camera, but it's right here. I can see it with the one on the interior, and then same fold over there. So we're effectively creating a three-dimensional pocket by just having this be a little bit oversized widthwise, and then putting the tucks in on either side. So here I'm going to do the same thing here once I get kind of close. It's a little easier to do once I get a little closer. So make the fold to give it the three-dimensionality. Sometimes it takes me a second to get it just right. And then I'll start going up, get to the zipper, and always being aware of where the zipper pull is, because we don't want to run over that. That's how you can throw your machine out of time. Sometimes I have done it and it does go through the zipper pull, you know, but it's still surprising and not, you know, these machines ideally are not going through metal. So there we go, we're at the top, and now we can make our final turn and fold. There we go, we've got our front panel here. You know, this will get trimmed off, that'll get trimmed off. So we've got our three-dimensionality, grab handle bar tacked in there, and then our zipper. So at this point I can go ahead and attach the bottom panel, which I will grab. So here's the bottom panel, it's just a rectangle. And I figure since I'm making this bag out of Ultra for my buddy, I might as well make the bottom out of Ultra as well. Normally when I make these bags, no matter what the exterior fabric is, I will use a nylon coated Dyneema. So it's a nylon Dyneema sandwich. Now I can go ahead and trim this off, and these little ends to the zipper are just, you know, little scraps that I got from cutting out the fabric. So there we go, we've got our front panel, our bottom. Let's go ahead and make the back panel now. Actually, no, scratch that. Let's make our side pocket. So this is called Ultra Stretch. It's from Challenge, which the Ultra is as well, but this stuff is stretchy. And it's also a UHM WPE, so it's very, very difficult to cut, and even harder because it's stretchy. So what I've started doing now is I just like fold this once, twice, thrice, and I just tack it down just to hold it there. And this way it keeps the elasticity of it. You know, before I was sewing in a piece of webbing, but because I don't have any zigzag stitching machines, it kind of gets rid of the stretch when you sew across it like that. So this way it creates a nice clean edge, looks nicer, and it still is stretchy. So, and another thing I found when sewing stretchy stuff, I really dislike sewing stretchy stuff, but if you have it on the bottom side and you start in the middle and you go out either way, it kind of tends to not pull as badly as if you have it on top. So we're just tacking this on there, making sure we're catching it. There we go. All right, it doesn't matter that I missed it a little bit because we're going to catch it as we go into the main body of the bag. So there we go. We got that tacked on there. So those are our two side panel pieces. And we can go ahead and make our back panel now. All right, so to do these straps, I get these die cut and laminated. So there's a top sheet that's a little bit thicker than the bottom sheet. And the top sheet is like more higher density, so it spreads the load, and then the bottom sheet's a little more comfortable against the body. And then this fabric, I have them glue that straight on. It's called ETC fabric. They use it a lot in shoe bed liners, so it doesn't get very hot, and it's abrasion resistant while also staying soft. And whatever material I'm making these backpacks from, I will match it to the exterior. So same Ultra 200 here. Whoops. And I'll just stitch this guy on. While also winding a bobbin. All right, I'm gonna go grab another piece of this for this other strap, stitch that on, and then I'll trim around the edge, and I'll be right back. All right, so now we have our straps sewn on. The face fabric is sewn on, so I'm gonna bar tack on these tri-glides or whatever they're called. So just make sure there's room around the bottom edge for binding tape. So the bottom is bar tacked on. Sometimes my knives don't work on the bar tacker. And now I can go ahead, fold it over once, make sure it's in the middle, make sure there's no slack so it's not like pulling up on this, or you know, the opposite like that. So make sure it's taut but not too taut. And then throw another bar tack in at the top. So there we go, now we got that attached. We can go ahead and do it to the other side. All right, now we can go back to the other machine. So now we have those straps bar tacked on. So this is where the sternum strap will go, and then obviously this is where you attach and adjust the straps that attach to the backpack. And now I've got this 1-inch elastic webbing that I'm gonna go over the top here, so you can stick your sternum strap in there when you don't need it. And I want to make sure that they match height-wise. And I like to put these on at a little bit of an angle. I just think it looks cooler. And we're just tacking these on because we're going to go and bind them next. All right, so those are on there. I want to make sure they're trimmed to exactly the right spot. Got no threads hanging on. And then we can take them over to the binding machine and just bind around these entire straps. Right now we're at the binding machine. Get ready to get it going here. So I'm just going to go all the way around the edge here. Don't need to go over this top edge because that's going to get stuck into a seam. So as I'm doing this, I'm just making sure that I'm pushing it all the way in up against the binding attachment as it's folding this binding tape, because we don't want any like air gaps or whatever. So the hardest part of this is around the bottom. Just take it nice and slow. Really hard to do this by hand if you don't have one of these folding attachments. And when I'm getting close to the end, I'll just get my other one here and just feed it right in. And you might have seen just there, as I get close to the bottom here, I fold up our little Mako tri-glide thingy. I don't think it's technically called a tri-glide, but and as I get close to the end here, I'm going to grab my other piece that's getting a binding tape on this bag, which is the drop pocket. Since we're at the binder, might as well get that done. And then try to waste as little binding tape as possible. And now we can go back to the main machine. Make sure we didn't miss any spots. Looks like I could throw in a single stitch or two on this one, but otherwise they're looking good. So let's go back to the main machine. All right, so before we sew the straps onto the back panel, let's do these bottom diamond anchors, which I cut from some scrappy pieces of it, so they're not exactly perfect, but we'll just trim off the excess. Basically just a diamond that I fold in half and then fold in half again, and then I stick this 3/4 inch webbing all the way down so that it goes into the seam. So there's no need to bar tack these, in my opinion, because it's getting stitched the whole way down, it's going into the seam, so super, super strong. And when I'm doing a batch of these, just like anything else, I'll just do like 20 of them or whatever, and just no need to cut the thread, just do them on a little chain like this. All right, we've got our little anchors, and again, this is going to get trimmed off, so I had this piece of scrap that was going to work, so I went for it. And now we've got our back panel, our grab handle, our straps, and our piece of foam. So actually, before I stick the foam on there, I am going to baste the straps down, and I did hot knife these ends here so that they don't fray as well. So I have my marks that you can't see from the camera because it's just like a Milwaukee Sharpie pen line, but that way I can know exactly where the middle is and then where the straps go, and then baste them down like this in the right spot while attaching the grab handle. And then I can get my sheet of foam. So on the full feature drop liner backpacks, this gets dropped in after the fact, but it is faster, obviously, to just stitch it right on. It's not removable after the fact, and it does make actually making the bag a little bit more difficult, but it is faster. So just baste it on here. And then as I get close to the bottom, I got my little anchor guys here, and you want to leave room for your seam allowance on the bottom panel. And a piece of foam is a little bit oversized, and I can just trim that away. That's on purpose. And then same thing on this side. And obviously we want it to match and be symmetrical there. Gotta hold it down really tight when I sew over it because it wants to move. And there we go. We're good to go. Go ahead and grab our little strap keepers, slide it on here, and then slide them through here. So that's what these look like, these little guys. Slide it on, thread it through here, back down and through, and then through the strap keeper again. And these are just little things for, if you're riding a bike or a motorcycle or whatever, can keep the straps from flapping like crazy. It's a little tidier. So get those threaded on, kind of keeps the straps out of the way a little bit, and we'll go through and bar tack those down so that they don't come undone. But since we're here, we might as well keep going on this and attach the other side of our bottom panel to the back panel here. Make sure to chuck in a good back tack on either end, on both sides. So now we have our front panel with the pocket, bottom panel, back panel, and it's going to be like so. So now since we have our side panel already made, it's going to be like this. So we can go ahead. So yeah, there's curves on the back to like kind of match your back, and the corresponding opposite curve on the front part of the bag. So we'll go ahead and match this side up. Do a good back tack here. Go down. And this foam is already getting in my way. And then when we get to this seam, since it's not top stitched, you want to make sure that it's folded over this way, because you got to think about water running down over it. So we know water is going to be coming down like this if gravity is indeed real, and we want water to flow down and over the seam and not get stuck in it. So usually what I'll do is I'll go to this bottom end and do a tiny little back tack, and then I'll start from the top here. So flip it around, and kind of different materials that I work with act a little differently, and sometimes there's a tiny little bit to fold into that bottom seam, which is also not top stitched. So there we go. And I can see my stitch line through the foam here. And once I get close, it is easier to see from this side. So it's going to be hard to see from that camera angle right now, but I'll turn it around and show it to you when I'm done here. It is a little bit of finger strength intensive to do this sort of thing with the foam. You know, the foam is already needing to be rassled a little bit here. So that's what it looks like now. There's a little bit of excess there. That's okay. We're dropping an aligner in there, so no one will ever see it. So this is what it looks like from the good side, from the side that people are going to see. So now it's time to do the opposite end, making sure that I don't have, okay, yeah, I didn't catch any straps in there or anything in that seam. So now I can go ahead and get this other side on here to close up the exterior. Again, and this time the zipper pull here is kind of hidden, so I just want to get it out of the way. I don't want to be stitching over it. Oh, dropping everything. So chuck in a nice back tack at the top here. And start stitching on down. Actually, I'm going to switch the camera over to this side so you guys can see what I'm doing. Now get the zipper pull out of the way. And keep on going down and attaching this bad boy. And same thing on this seam, we want it to be oriented in the right way. And if seams are top stitched ahead of time, it does make this a little bit easier. And again here, I'll throw in a tiny little back tack, just make sure it doesn't come apart, and then I'll start from the back side here. Do a nice back tack at the top. And then here, since I can see nicely, I'm gonna go ahead and finish it up. So there we go. It's a little bit wavy, so I'll just chuck another stitch in, a little bit more inboard of that to even it out. And yeah, we're good to go. So now we can get started on the liner. So before we head over to the liner, I just wanted to show you what it looks like right now. This is the exterior portion of the bag ready to go. Obviously it's flipped inside out right now. We've got our foam, and then we've got the inside of the front panel there. So I'm not going to flip it right side out until we get the liner made and then sewn around the top here. So let's go ahead and make the liner now. So first thing is get this interior zippered pocket, which is just kind of like an hourglass figure that I fold in half, sewn on to the zipper, or the zipper sewn onto it. So I just stitch across the top and then a top stitch to hold it there. Get this new bobbin winding. Now I'll put the zipper pull on here. So this is just the number 5 standard. Fold it over. And then I'll grab my interior panel, which is both the front and the bottom all in one piece. And line it up. Stitch it along, leaving a little bit of room at the top for seam allowance, because we don't want the zipper to be like too far into the seam. Get to the corner, make the turn. And then back tack here. And then same thing on this side, we'll just back tack this. Excuse me. And for the other side, which is the back panel, this is the same pattern piece as the back panel itself. And then the drop pocket, which is the same as the bottom, but it's just wider. So I can go ahead, tack this in. And once I get to the bottom and make this turn, I'll put in one of these gussets on this side. When I get to the other side, I'll put in another gusset on the other side. Make the turn. And when I get to the top, I'll back tack as well. So now we've got our back and our front. We'll stitch them to each other to make one long piece. Make sure to do a nice back tack here. And then again at this end. And then I'll trim this so it's nice and clean, and then we'll take it over to the seam taping machine and run some seam tape along the bottom here. Then we'll attach the side panels, and then we'll seam tape that. So let's go ahead. I'm going to get this trimmed, and I'll meet you over at the seam sealing machine. All right, seam sealing machine is heating up. It's got this single seam at the bottom of the bag, ready to go. Got my seam tape loaded up, and now we're at the right temperature, so we can go ahead and tape this. There we go, that's done. So now we can go back to the main machine, stitch around the sides. I'm just going to leave the seam sealing machine running so that it's ready for us when we're done with that. Right, so we've got front, match up the right curves. There we go. And match up the top edge, do a nice big back tack without going over the zipper, hopefully. and then just follow the curves. Without getting any tucks in there. And then put in a nice back tack at the top here. Same thing on this other side. Nice back tack. Making sure we're not getting anything caught in there that we don't want caught in there. It's always part of the game once you start getting enough layers going. Nice big back tack at the top. Now I can go ahead and get this trimmed just to make sure there's nothing overhanging and the seam tape gets a full coverage of everything. And we can go seam tape this. Okay, so we're back on the seam taping machine and we're ready to go around this long seam. And make sure that I'm going nice and slow, especially around the curves. So the bigger the radius you have on anything you're seam taping, the easier it is. You know, if it's a pretty tight radius, it's really tricky to put seam tape on it easily or effectively. But anytime you're going around curves, it is way trickier than just doing a straight shot. One seam down, one to go. When I first got the seam taping machine years ago, I hired one of the people who works at the dry seat factory that I was getting fabric from just for a day, because that's all I could afford, but just hired and watched her use the seam taping machine to see if I could get any tips. It's not exactly, at least at the time, there wasn't a whole lot of YouTube content about, you know, how to use the seam taping machine. That's not what this video is either, but yeah, a couple little tips in here about just have a bigger radius seam to go around is going to be easier. You're always making sure you're like pulling it apart, as it were, just to make sure that you're not getting any extra fabric in the area you're seam taping. Yeah, if y'all want a dedicated seam sealer tips and tricks video, let me know. But you know, this is kind of one of the machines that few people have, so maybe not the best use of our time. All right, now we're seam taped. We're good to go. And let's go ahead and double check, make sure there's no areas of gaps. If there is, I'll go ahead and hit that with another little overlapping piece of seam tape. But if we're good to go, we can go ahead and attach this to our exterior. All right, here we've got our liner, and I can go ahead and flip it right side out. And we've got our exterior still inside out, and I'll go ahead and match up the back panel to the back panel while trying to keep it in the frame of the camera here. There we go. and just drop the exterior into the interior. And now I'll go ahead and stitch it around this top perimeter here. And there we go, now it's in frame. So I want to match up the seams so that they match. And it doesn't really matter where I start, just kind of like to hold it real tight till I get a couple stitches in. There we go. Needle positioning really helps with this, especially the foam it's always a wrestling mesh. Making sure I'm not running over the zipper. Okay, good. Checking I'm getting the layers. Hopefully my head is not in the camera shot here. So this definitely would be easier with thinner foam or no foam, but it is nice when you're using the bag to have that structure to it. So in the end, these straps get attached to the back panel like 5 or 6 times by the time everything is said and done. So they're not going anywhere. Yep. All right, there we go. Now we've got the interior here attached to the exterior. So we can go ahead and make the lid and then the cinch, attach those, and that'll be it. So this is the exterior of the lid. This is our Uratech, our precious Uratech zipper, which is quite expensive, quite hard to find these days if you're a small company. Attach the same fabric that the bag is made from on either end of it there for the same purposes of zipper doesn't really need to go the entire way across in this particular instance, and it reduces the bulk in the seams as well. So it's kind of a fun shape, this lid, I think. It's got some three-dimensionality to it for sure. As we'll see in a second here, but back tack on the zipper, fold it back just a scotch. Zipper pull out of the way, and then we'll fold this back a little bit more for a zipper garage. Back tack, and then I'll trim off. And again, these are excess pieces of fabric that I got from when I was cutting out the main pieces of the bag. Now we'll do our top stitch. Good to go, and then this is the bottom side. Make sure it's centered. Nice back tack. And then when I get close to the zipper garage, I'm just gonna like finger wrestle some three-dimensionality into it. It doesn't want to do it, but that way we give the zipper some space, the zipper pull, some space to go into. So I don't know if that shows it. Right here, yeah. Some three-dimensionality to it there, so it's not just flat like this other side. And top stitch this guy. All right, so we've got our zipper and our zipper pull there, so there's a nice small garage there for it, and now these parts just get super back tacked to create this three-dimensionality. Last one. And then this is the same pattern, but this is the interior of it. So same thing here, except for the zipper. We just attach these pieces to each other to create the three-dimensionality. There we go, we've got our interior, we've got our exterior, and we'll just match them up and stitch them to each other. And this excess will get trimmed off before it goes through the binding machine. And before I trim, I'll go ahead and attach our 3/4 inch fidlock here. So this is the center, and then this is going to go like that. So I'll just find the middle and go on either side of it. Okay, now I can go ahead and trim off any little excess bits and bring it over to the binding machine. But before we bind that, since we're already set up here, might as well just finish this cinch, which is this rectangular piece of ripstop nylon. We've got our pull cord here, which is a reflective pull cord, and then our little pop lock here, which just goes on the open end, pops, tie a knot into it just to make sure it doesn't come out. And then on this piece of ripstop, we'll do outside face to outside face. Throw in a nice back tack at the top. Stitch down a little ways, and then pretty rudimentary here, but I'll just like fold it over, find the middle point, and just keep my fingers there. And when I get close to it, I'll do a back tack, and then cut it, and then hop over a little area, do a nice big back tack again, and then a nice big back tack at the end. No, not that nice and big. So what we end up with is this little gap of not sewn fabric, and then I'll take the loop end of it, stick it through this little area, and then pull it through, and then fold to match up the seam to itself. And then just to keep everything organized, just stitch around the entire circumference of this thing, matching up the edges. So this way I don't need to put a grommet or a second piece of fabric. And I find it works really well. It reduces weight and reduces the parts needed. So pretty simple, but just leaving a little area unstitched in the middle seems to work. There we go. Now we've got our cinch with our seam down the middle and our unsewn area that will allow us to cinch it tight. And now we can go ahead and bind the lid before we attach the lid and the cinch to the rest of the bag. So I've got the lid here, trimmed, ready to bind, and I'll just start at where it goes into the back panel and go all the way around to the other side where it goes into the back panel. And we ran out of bobbin. Alright, so last step to do on the lid, except for trim away all that thread, is to just throw a little stitch in to this buckle to make sure it's facing down and not, just loosey-goosey floppy. Alright, so I'm over here on the heavier duty walking foot machine here, since we're going through quite a few layers at this point. Got our lid that we do need to still throw this little back tack onto. Easier to do it now than when it's attached to the bag. Let's get rid of these little thread guys here. Now we can go ahead and attach the lid to the back panel. And I'll just center it so that there's the same amount of seam allowance, quote unquote, on either side. Making sure that there's not a bunch of stuff in the way, because we're already stitching through quite a bit of material here. Cool, so we've got that attached. This will get trimmed off. And now we can get our cinch ready, match up the center points that we have from earlier with this seam on the cinch. And kind of the same thing as attaching the interior to the exterior. I just want to hold it really tight in place until I get a couple of stitches in, and then I can rework it. And I literally have to stick my head in here sometimes, so apologies if that shot was a bit of just the back of my head. And again, if this would be easier and easier to see inside of if we were doing it without the foam already inside the bag. I'm trying to keep my head out of the shot here, hopefully. I'm doing a good job at that. Because normally my head is right here, and just to give you a little example of what I normally look like when I'm not using video, I'm like this. And I can see way better when I'm doing that sort of thing. So with my right hand here, I'm just kind of feeling through to make sure that the zipper pull is not going to be in the way. And once the backside with the foam in it is on the machine bed, it is a lot easier to see inside here. So this is our second to last line of stitching. It's going all the way through the straps and the foam and the back panel, because we still are just going to do one more of binding tape around the circumference here, opening. Okay, so then the last major operation for this bag will be to, bind it after I do some trimming and get rid of all this kind of extra stuff. And then we'll put some binding tape around it and hot knife it shut, and then it'll be pretty much ready to go. All right, so now I have this trimmed. Go ahead and stick this in the binding machine. Go across the front. It's pretty chunky when I get to the back panel here, so I really have to put quite a bit of force into the binding attachment, and also making sure that we're not catching anything we don't want to. This binding attachment was not really designed and made to go through this much foam, so I kind of just have to send it and also force it a little bit, which is not ideal. But I can't afford a second binding attachment. There we go. Hide all that ugly stitching under there. And then I'll take this over to the hot knife station and close that off. And we'll be good to go. Kind of check that I didn't anything too ugly here. That's could be a little bit better. There's a tiny little bit sticking out there, but not the end of the world. It's not going to have any negative performance effects on the bag, and that's what matters most. And it kind of hides away a little bit once you actually get the cinch up. All right, so let's go to the hot knife, just do this, and then get ready to flip it right side out. All right, I'm over here by my carbon extraction, carbon filter. And again, the foam is in the way here of getting it as close as I can. But it's worth it for not having to make an extra a few panels and access to be able to stick the foam in there on these simple drop liners. All right, there we go. I've got seam tape, binding tape, sorry, hot knifed at the edge there. There's a couple different ways to do that. You can just fold it over and stitch it, but I like this hot knife method. And now we're ready to flip it right side out. All right, so now I've got the whole thing stitched together, and we can go ahead and flip it right side out. So there's no right or wrong way to do this. You know, factories that have bigger setups have either machines that do this, or they have like a metal post with a foam pad on the end that you kind of just yank down on it. I just flip it out like this and just go through and make sure to get all the extremities fully flipped right side out. And then the final things to do on the simple drop liner backpack is to put a bar tack in this main closure fiddle lock strap, and then put a bar tack on the ends of these guys, and then just make a sternum strap for it and clip that on. So that's how I make the simple drop liner backpack. This is the medium size, and this zipper pocket on the back is not standard. This is an upgrade. But this big zippered pocket on the outside is a standard thing, so you can kind of just like flip it over one shoulder and then have easy access to this area. And the stretch pocket on the side for your water bottle, that is standard. And on the inside, we've got one zippered pocket on the front, and then the drop pocket on the back, which is kind of for smaller laptops or tablets. And yeah, seam sealed. Medium-sized simple drop liner backpack is good to go. Just got to do a few bar tacks and make a sternum strap, and it'll be ready to ship out. So that's how I make a simple drop liner backpack. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see y'all next time.